us. While Washington assumed dominance was permanent, Canada built something more powerful: trust. And tonight, the world is...
Breaking tonight, Ontario just rejected 150,000 tons of American beef. And within hours, Japan, Germany, and the U.S.
Imagine this scenario unfolding. America's agricultural dominance collapses in real time. Ontario doesn't negotiate, they reject. And the world follows immediately. Picture this. Something happens in North America that Wall Street never saw coming. A single decision made inside Ontario's agricultural ministry sends shockwaves across every continent. For decades, everyone believed one thing with absolute certainty: American beef was untouchable. If Tokyo ordered premium steak, it came from Texas. If Dubai wanted quality cuts, Montana delivered. If Singapore needed volume, the Midwest supplied. The United States wasn't just the supplier, it was the only supplier that mattered. Reliable, dominant, inevitable. Now imagine this. Ontario rejects 150,000 tons of American beef in one strategic sweep. What happens next? Japan pauses shipments within hours. Germany reconsiders long-standing contracts. The UAE starts exploring new partners. A global market that had bent toward Washington for half a century suddenly shifts its attention north. American ranchers watch their industry crumble, storage facilities overload, and terminals slow to a crawl. The world realizes something has changed forever. But here's what almost nobody understands. This wasn't about beef. This was about trust. And Canada just proved exactly why reliability defeats size every single time. Everyone believed American agricultural dominance was permanent. Financial analysts assumed global buyers had no alternatives. Trade experts expected the beef market to remain stable, regardless of political volatility. They were all utterly incorrect. Toronto, March 27-25. Standing before agricultural officials, Ontario's trade minister made a statement that reverberated across 5 continents. If Washington wants to weaponize tariffs, we will respond with agriculture. Starting immediately, we are rejecting American beef imports and sourcing from verified Canadian suppliers. Translation: Ontario just told Washington that Canadian sovereignty is non-negotiable. The rejection wasn't symbolic, it was 150,000 tons. Massive enough to expose every crack in America's food system, loud enough that Tokyo, Berlin, and Dubai heard it clearly, and strategic enough that it arrived exactly when the U.S. beef industry was already struggling. Because here's what the headlines missed. Tyson Foods had just shut down its massive Lexington, Nebraska facility. Another major plant in Amarillo, Texas, downgraded to single-shift operation. American ranchers were fighting rising feed costs, labor shortages, and transportation chaos left over from pandemic disruptions. The industry was running on fumes. It just needed one shock to expose the instability. Ontario provided that shock. And dear viewers, what unfolded next reveals exactly why Canada is reshaping global agriculture, while America's dominance collapses in real time. The first domino fell in Tokyo. Japan, one of the world's most important premium beef buyers, quietly reduced future American orders. They didn't announce it publicly. They didn't need to. The market noticed immediately when shipment volumes dropped and Japanese buyers started contacting Canadian suppliers. Germany followed within days, reassessing contracts that had been renewed automatically for decades. The UAE began exploring long-term Canadian partnerships. South Korea requested volume commitments from Alberta producers. Something extraordinary was happening. International buyers weren't just replacing one supplier with another. They were diversifying away from American unpredictability. They were hedging against Washington's tariff volatility. They were preparing for a future where U.S. beef was no longer the gold standard. Export terminals across the American Midwest started reporting slower movement. Containers sat longer in refrigerated storage. Shipments backed up. Processing facilities couldn't keep pace. And the costs? Feed prices jumped. Fuel got expensive. Labor stayed scarce. American ranchers watched their profit margins disappear, while contracts they'd relied on for years suddenly went to Canadian suppliers across the border. The illusion of American dominance finally shattered, not because Canada attacked it, but because the United States destabilized itself while Canada stayed steady, professional, and prepared. And that preparation, dear viewers, wasn't accidental. While Washington spent years fighting tariff battles and creating agricultural uncertainty, Canada invested in something far more valuable: credibility. Canadian officials built relationships across Asia, Europe, and the Middle East through quiet, consistent diplomatic engagement. They modernized safety standards. They strengthened export certification programs. They positioned Canada as a neutral, stable supplier in an increasingly polarized world. When American agricultural policy swung wildly between administrations, Canada maintained predictable regulations. When U.S. ranchers struggled with cost fluctuations, Canadian producers offered stable pricing. When Washington weaponized food exports for political leverage, Ottawa emphasized reliability and partnership. Countries like Japan and South Korea, which value long-term supply chain stability, found Canada's approach refreshing. The UAE admired Canadian transparency and production standards. Even Germany, known for strict food regulations, viewed Canada as a dependable alternative. So when Ontario rejected those American shipments, international buyers didn't hesitate. They moved toward the country they already trusted, the country that had been preparing for this exact moment. Contracts that once defaulted to the United States began shifting north. And Canada didn't just accept the business, they expanded processing capacity, negotiated favorable trade terms, and strengthened relationships that had been overshadowed by American dominance for decades. What looked like a sudden boom was actually the culmination of years of strategic positioning. Canada had been building trust, while America assumed loyalty was permanent. And in global food markets, trust is the only currency that truly matters. The impact rippled far beyond ranches and export terminals. Restaurants adjusted menus. Food processors rewrote supply agreements. Retail buyers signed multi-year contracts with Canadian suppliers to ensure consistent quality and predictable delivery. Countries that had relied heavily on American beef locked in Canadian partnerships, stabilizing domestic prices and securing volume commitments. Some regions actually saw food costs drop because Canadian shipments proved more reliable than American alternatives disrupted by political uncertainty. Economists warned Washington that this wasn't a temporary reaction. Trust, once broken, takes years to rebuild. And in agriculture, buyers don't wait for suppliers to stabilize. They move on. American ranchers found themselves trapped between rising operational costs and shrinking market access. Many sold cattle at lower margins. Some postponed facility expansions. Others reduced herd sizes entirely, wondering if they could remain competitive in an industry that suddenly viewed them as unstable. Meanwhile, Canadian producers expanded operations to meet surging international demand. Alberta processing facilities increased capacity. Saskatchewan ranchers negotiated export deals with Asian markets. British Columbia suppliers secured long-term European contracts. The power dynamics shifted so dramatically that trade analysts started asking a question nobody had seriously considered just months earlier. Is Canada about to lead the global beef market? A major debate is unfolding behind closed doors in trade ministries, agricultural boards, and food councils worldwide. Everyone wants the same answer. Is this disruption temporary, or did we just witness a permanent power shift? The optimistic American view assumes the situation will stabilize. The United States still has enormous ranching capacity, advanced infrastructure, and decades of established relationships. In theory, Washington should regain its position once political uncertainty subsides. But privately, analysts are far less confident. Because the crisis isn't about tariffs. It's about credibility. And credibility, once damaged, doesn't repair quickly. Over the past several years, international buyers watched American agricultural policy swing between administrations. They saw unpredictable export regulations, rising costs, labor shortages, plant closures, and sudden trade confrontations. Markets remember instability, and they definitely don't reward it. Canada's advantage isn't size, it's reliability. While Washington wrestled with political volatility, Ottawa built a reputation for consistent safety standards, predictable pricing, and diplomatic transparency. So when Ontario rejected American beef, buyers didn't view Canada as a backup supplier. They viewed Canada as an upgrade. That perception threatens American dominance far more than any single trade decision. Because once international buyers sign multi-year contracts with Canadian producers, they won't casually switch back. Restaurants, retailers, pintois, and processors need stable supply chains, not political drama. And Canada is offering exactly that at the moment America struggles to provide it. If the United States doesn't rebuild confidence quickly, this may not be a temporary dip. It may be the beginning of a new era where Canada isn't just competing in the global beef market, it's leading it. The North American beef market didn't collapse overnight, and Canada didn't rise by accident. What unfolded began as a rejection in Ontario, but it revealed something far bigger than a trade dispute. It showed who'd been preparing, who'd stayed consistent, who'd built trust quietly while everyone else assumed the system would never change. Washington spent decades believing dominance was permanent. Markets would always buy American. Ranchers would always lead. Buyers would always trust the brand. That certainty, it just evaporated. But the moment instability became visible, the moment processing plants shut down, the moment tariffs turned into political weapons, international buyers made a choice. They looked for reliability, and every path led north. Canada didn't have to outmuscle America. It only had to remain steady when the United States wasn't. That reliability, those consistent audits, that predictable pricing, that diplomatic calm became more valuable than sheer production volume. And in global food markets, reliability is power. The world is watching both countries closely now. One is fighting to rebuild confidence. The other is expanding its reach faster than anyone imagined possible. This isn't just about cattle or contracts. It's about credibility. It's about which country global markets trust when uncertainty strikes. And right now, Canada has proven something Washington never expected. Leadership doesn't always belong to the biggest player. Sometimes it belongs to the one that stays steady when everything else starts shaking. What comes next will define the future of North American agriculture. But one thing is absolutely clear. The balance has shifted. And dear viewers, the world has already noticed. If you understand what just happened here, if you see why reliability defeated dominance, you're watching something historic unfold in real time. Because this pattern, this exact strategy of preparation over size, diplomacy over confrontation, stability over volatility, this is exactly how Canada is reshaping global markets, while Washington struggles to understand what changed. The beef industry was just the beginning. Look, everything I've shown you tonight comes from public data and official reporting. But the conclusions, those are mine. You decide what it means. If you're here because you want to understand how Canada is repositioning itself on the global stage, if you see why strategic preparation beats raw power, if you recognize that the world is changing and Canada is leading that change, then you're in the right place. This is Canada Next. We break down the moves that matter, the strategies that work, and the patterns that everyone else misses until it's too late. The beef market just proved it. Reliability defeats dominance. Preparation beats assumption. And Canada isn't waiting for permission to lead.